Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
So in this episode, we're going to be talking about compulsive apologizing, which rose out of a really interesting conversation I had had recently with a friend of mine, and was having a big dinner party. And during the dinner party, she had been inadvertently apologizing over and over again for imagined problems with the dinner. So, just as the entree is being served, immediately she found herself apologizing for, the rice being overcooked and perhaps some nuance of the spicing which wasn't correct, and kind of confessing this immediately. And while this was happening, she looked across the room and saw her daughter rolling her eyes every time she would make these apologies, which brought this flush of awareness to her that this was really pervasive, powerful behavior. And I think also brought to her awareness that there might be some other way of thinking about this.
Can I just ask, how old was the daughter?
I think the daughter is in her early 20s.
Okay. I was going to say, I have a teen daughter and she rolls her eyes at me all the time.
There you go, for all kinds of things. There might be important signals in all of that. But what it did is it initiated, I think, a really deep question, which she had shared with me and that I would love to bring out in conversation here, is what are the roots of compulsive apologizing, and whether or not we've caught ourselves doing that, or perhaps we have a friend who does this all the time. It can seem very mysterious, but what I appreciate now that I've been thinking about it, it is a very powerful kind of compulsive behavior that people have a hard time breaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely probably always have at least one person in my practice who kind of presents this way. So I think it's a really interesting subject. I think it's an interesting thing to think about, what's going on interpersonally and intrapsychically when someone is caught in something like this. And we could think of it as a complex, right? Or the manifestation maybe of a complex.
And I'm wondering what the feeling is, and how it might be related to feeling of inadequacy and shame. And so I will go ahead and apologize first, whoever that person is, before you can shame me by criticizing my undercooked or overcooked rice, for example. I'll go ahead and do that, preempt you.
And so if we again put that in the psychic landscape as a complex, we might imagine that this person had a lot of early experiences of being very heavily monitored by authority figures and having anything that just even appeared to be a fault really blazingly pointed out and or perhaps even punished. There might have been a very strong anxiety-producing response.
Maybe a lot of shaming.
And shaming, which produces a lot of feeling.
Yeah, definitely.
And then as the early landscape is populated with numerous experiences of being shamed or being pointed out for a failing, whether it's real or imagined failing, that these memories then all group together and they become a core attitude and or even a core figure in the psyche, which can sometimes even show up in dreams.
So that takes me to the concept of compensation, which in Jungian theory, whatever we might be unbalanced about, if consciousness is in one position, then the unconscious, through dreams or a slip of the tongue or a behavioral oops, will try to compensate in order to restore psychic balance. And I'm thinking that if a child was shamed, he or she might then try to compensate by kind of being perfect and behaving well, and thus earning his or her approval in the family, since it's not unconditional. If I behave properly and say please and thank you and have good table manners, then I can be perfect and compensate for my own feelings of unworthiness, inherent internal unworthiness. But I cover it up through my efforts at perfection. And if my dinner wasn't exactly perfect, I better cover up that flaw right away and apologize for it.
So there's an internal pressure to do everything perfect, which is also being monitored by some kind of a criteria inside of the psyche or some kind of an inner figure. So part of the problems when complexes are the things that are driving our behavior is that it's very difficult to know whether our failure is real or whether it's just been an object which is being hostilely attacked by an inner figure. And that's one of the really deep problems about perfectionism, is that who's establishing what's perfect inside the psychic environment? So if my friend is incredibly anxious about the quality of the rice that they made, who in there is deciding what perfect rice even looks like? Who's established that in the psyche? But clearly someone has in this particular model of, shooting for perfection. What I would suggest is I'm not even sure if people who compulsively apologize know what the perfect thing would look like. I think the attack, the internal attack towards whatever it is that they have produced is actually not terribly discriminate.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a little bit, I don't know, the image that comes up for me is someone in a bunker and there's just incoming from every direction. And there's a little bit, the feeling for me is that there's a little bit of franticness in it. Just trying to defend against any and all kind of incoming attack. And I'm resting into this, Joseph, and what I'm aware of is some of the people that I've seen with this trait, it also maps onto having a very critical inner voice, of just a kind of eviscerating stream of constant negative critical thoughts.
And do we think that always comes up from having critical authority figures in the childhood?
I think it's probably more like, this could be a whole podcast topic in and of itself that I think would be really interesting. But I think it's probably more correct to say it's something about the quality of attachment. I bet if you have super critical parents, it often does translate into an inner critical voice. But I think if there's a strong positive attachment overall, it probably mitigates some of the effect of the critical voice. And maybe if you have very distant, poor quality attachment with your parents and they're not particularly critical, that could still translate into an inner critical voice.
Right, because especially if the young child is somehow feels abandoned or is actually experiencing being abandoned, it's hard for the child to imagine the psychology of their parents. So they would naturally go to, I must be doing something wrong. There's something wrong with me or what I've done.
Right. And this kind of, the object relationists kind of talked about this sort of thing, this sort of the internal bad object and that sort of thing.
And it's easier, healthier in a certain sense for a child to blame himself or herself because I didn't do this right, or I forgot to do that, or didn't do this well enough, rather than to have to even try to find words for my parents don't really care about me enough, or I live in a random world where things don't make sense.
Yeah.
At least it gives the child what we call an internal locus of control of, I can try to do better. I can make my bed more neatly or pick up all my toys. It's an effort at earning one's way and having control over your life and your destiny.
If your parents have just abandoned you or not loving, that situation as it is, if you're a child, it really is out of your control. And so it is more adaptive in a way to believe that it's your fault.
Right.
Because then maybe you can change the direction of things.
And then to displace it onto actions and behavior. It has to go somewhere because a child can't say, maybe it's I who am somehow inherently inadequate. Oh, it must be because my room is messy, or I didn't get good grades in school, or, some other action, some concrete thing that it can get pasted onto.
So then the apologizing, let's say, for the house not being clean enough or my room not being clean enough preemptively is at its root some effort to restore connection, to restore rapport with the other.
It's a bargain. If I do all these things better, then I will get the approval or love or whatever else might be unable to be voiced by a child, but nevertheless longed for.
So the striving for the perfection is a striving for love, which in the fantasy realm at least might be achieved if the perfected state were to happen, so that the distant parent would become close,
yes,
or the hostile parent would become calm and affirming, that at the end of this there would be some reaction from the other person. And in a way, compulsive apologizing does achieve some of that. Because if we went to somebody's home and they instantly were telling us how, awful their home was, it would elicit from us all kinds of warmth. Oh, don't say that. Your home is beautiful. You've done such a great job. You're such a wonderful homemaker. So it actually does pull forward some of the things that are wished for, right?
So it's we then become, if we're this person's house guest, the compensatory function of your home is lovely. And, this and that and the other thing, but it's external to the person, so that it becomes a two-person dynamic instead of an internal dynamic that says, I am adequate, my home is perfectly fine, come on in. No, it has to get projected onto the other as the reassurer.
And somehow that it still must not be scratching the itch, because if somebody is compulsively apologizing, the ritual of apologizing for some imagined deficit or fault, eliciting the reassuring comments from the other people, it can go on and on and on for years, and it never scratches the itch.
Right. And the truth is that if you have a sort of obsessive concern, for example, reassurance actually makes it worse.
Say more. It's a very interesting kind of paradox.
I think that's a research finding.
I think I saw that a little bit too.
Yes. So, for example, if you have an obsessive fear that you have, let's say, a health concern. Okay. And oh my gosh, do you think that, what if I have cancer?
Oh, yeah, I've definitely seen that in clients.
And the more that someone says, no, that's really not what the symptoms you have, that has nothing to do with cancer. It's like that. It's like it will calm it for just a second, but then it will pop back just as big as before,
So in those situations, when I've worked with people that their fear seems to be attached to an odd object that doesn't make sense, that one of the therapeutic movements is for them to be able to validate the fact that they're anxious and entertain the idea that they're attaching it to the wrong object. And what might the correct source of the anxiety be? Which I suppose could go to the compulsive apologizing. So if I'm compulsively apologizing about the cleanliness of one's house, and in fact it's really rather tidy, then there's a way that I'm continuing to be anxious about the wrong object, although the atmosphere of anxiety is really inside me and hasn't been properly named. So then therefore it's never properly soothed. And it goes to this idea that you can't get too much of what you don't need. So people can constantly reassure me that my house is beautiful, but if that's not really what I need, it kind of rolls right off my back.
Yeah. I mean, there is this way that, and what's coming up for me as you're saying that, is that compulsive apologizing feels like you're avoiding something. It's a kind of substitute for the real thing, whatever that is. It feels like an avoidance tack, both I think interpersonally, but also even intrapsychically. Like if you're kind of scurrying around apologizing for your house being dirty, what are you not aware of in you? What are you avoiding in you?
And it can feel so inauthentic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it often really does.
So in that way, it's really a defense.
It feels very inauthentic, and it can, as much as it can sort of trigger in us the desire to reassure and placate and serve as a palliative, it can also trigger us into feeling really aggressive.
Yeah.
And I'm really sorry. I said I'd get the report in at 3, and it's 3:07, and I'm really, really sorry. Can be maddening because people can feel avoided and evaded. And internally, that may be happening as well.
Well, it's this way that, masochism kind of invites sadism.
Yes, that's it. That's
and I'm
exactly
thinking
it.
about your friend's daughter, who was really, sounds like she was being a little bit aggressive, because so that this apologizing really made her irritated.
And then that can set the whole cycle off again of, I probably, maybe I have to apologize even more.
Right, because it seems anxiety-provoking to get the eye rolling.
Yeah, but what we really want is for the person to be more authentic of, no, the rice is not either over or undercooked. The report is 3:07 is fine to get your report in. That we pick up and kind of amplify what might be going on internally in the other person of what's the real deal here? What's happening here? There's insufficient contact inside the person and interpersonally if it goes into a two-person exchange.
If we just kind of unpack that a little bit, that borrowing, I think, Don Kalshad's work around defensive, that sometimes compulsive apologizing can be kind of a broken wing act. That somebody comes into the home, I'm suddenly having a flush of anxiety, and then I'm apologizing about the cleanliness almost to lead them off the track of what's really troubling me that I'm not ready to have any real contact about. And yet, on the level of soul, something in the person is in deep distress and wants that to be noticed. And on some level must want that to be engaged.
Yeah, I mean, and this is where I think of this quote from Jung that I just absolutely love, and I probably quote it all the time, but it's that a neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. So yes, there is some real pain there, but it's not because the rice is not perfect.
Yes, there's something more profound.
Yeah, and there's a way that the compulsive apologizing is a way of avoiding contact. It's avoiding the encounter with the suffering.
Yeah, that feels exactly right. If the person could stay with and track his or her authentic feeling of, oh my gosh, here comes the company and I'm anxious, without filling it in with content. It must be because the rice isn't done properly. That's the part that feels inauthentic.
And just feeling my way into it, another thing that could be defended against in that case is I'm sort of imagining, having a lovely dinner party and having people over to my house and feeling kind of maybe your friend was feeling really great, but it felt sort of threatening to let that in. Like, here I am, this hostess with this lovely food, and just kind of it felt like she had to sort of defend against envy or something like that. I'm just sort of walking around it in different ways.
I think there is an ancient fear of other people's envy. And in ancient cultures where people were much less polite than they are about their envy now, if somebody felt envious about something you had, they might try to literally harm you or take it from you or do something really dark. I mean, if we read some of these old Greek tragedies, people can go to...
I don't think it's just ancient. I think envy can be at the root of a lot of psychological harm now.
And that's the evil eye of these little talismans that people wear to ward off evil in an apopatreic, help me out here. I can't quite get the word out. Of the god, of warding off the evil, so that if you are humble and you apologize first, you will ward off the other person's envy.
So in that scenario, maybe I've cooked an opulent meal, which is really rather extraordinary and perhaps more extraordinary than, some of my friends like to entertain. I'm aware of that. I'm aware of the pleasure of being that generous and maybe even that skilled.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
But then something thrums in the unconscious saying, maybe it's dangerous to shine that bright.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then somebody wants to defend against what that might bring up in other people's psyches.
Oh, the rice is a little sticky or whatever,
Absolutely. Oh, there's a smudge on that water glass.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, it's all just now much less.
Mm-hmm.
Which also, in a sense, is co-participating in the way that people will often behave when they're envious. So when somebody is very envious, they will often demonstrate spoiling behavior.
Mm-hmm.
In order to decrease the pain of their personal experience of envy. And you may have had this experience where maybe you buy, a beautiful piece of furniture and you're sharing it with your neighbor and you're just thrilled with what it is. And the neighbor looks at it and she goes, oh, is it so? There's a nick. There's a little nick there on the side. Oh, you should really just go back to that manufacturer and complain. That's something that happens all the time.
Yeah.
But, what's happening is, I would suspect, is that the neighbor is experiencing an uncomfortable flush of envy and they want to have a little spoiling. They need to downgrade the couch so they don't make it feel too desirable. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, compulsive apologizing or compulsive self-criticism is kind of spoiling the treasure up front to appease the envious gods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's also this way of kind of purposefully, not necessarily consciously, but kind of signaling, telegraphing, I'm going to take the submissive role here. And that's a way to kind of propitiate against aggression, envy, or attack.
And competition even.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm not going to be, don't pose a threat. I'm no competition. And, it reminds me of the way that dogs, when two dogs meet, sometimes one of the dogs will lie down, roll over, and expose his neck. Mm-hmm. And that's a behavior that says, I am not a threat to you. I'm going to, I don't want to get into a fight with you. I'm making myself vulnerable to you. I think that's very much. I mean, I do sometimes have clients who come in and they start every session with an apology, about this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, what is getting telegraphed here,
So that they're safe, they're submissive, mm-hmm. they're not aggressive, mm-hmm. and so therefore you don't need to be aggressive mm-hmm. towards them, or they hope that you won't respond aggressively.
That's right.
Like that anxious tail wagging that dogs will do.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I'm friendly, don't bite me. Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
So what would that be a compensation for? Of I'm submissive, I'm friendly, I'm not a threat, don't worry, I'm not going to compete. I start to wonder, well, where is your aggression? Where mm-hmm. is your competitive spirit? If you have to say, I'm not that, it kind of gives me the idea that somewhere not too far below the surface, maybe you are that.
Yeah, actually, when I sink into this with people that I've known who do this, it really does start to feel like it's a defense against one's own feelings of anger and aggression.
Mm. And to just put that in a Jungian frame overtly, Jung advanced a very powerful and deep idea about the opposites. Mm-hmm. That everything in the psyche exists between the tension of opposites, which he felt was very practical and very real. So, for instance, if I have a personality that leads with a kind of submissive, belly up harmlessness, and that's in the outer personality, and it's something that I even have cultivated on a conscious level, in absolutely equal measure, deep in the unconscious, is its exact opposite that is also equally vibrant. And that for any one of those things to exist, its opposite must exist. Mm-hmm. It either comes as a pair or it doesn't come at all. So Jung would absolutely say, mm-hmm. in equal measure, there is aggression, sadism, some kind of an angry, fiery force that is in the unconscious just as powerfully.
Submissiveness has as its opposite a desire for dominance.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So when one is constellated, the other is like two sides of a coin. There's heads and then there's tails.
And, interestingly, I think in its worst manifestation, compulsive apologizing does feel like a sort of shadowy way of dominating the other. It's like this concept of the tyranny of the weak.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm over here apologizing and apologizing and apologizing. And in that, I am demanding that you pay attention to me, that you reassure me, that you make the conversation about me. So it can sort of lean into kind of dependent narcissism, I think.
It can. And this goes into this very interesting public discourse about emotional soothing animals. And, some comedians have, tried to bring a peacock onto an airplane, claiming it was like an emotional therapy animal, or somebody tried to bring a llama, into a lecture, claiming it was their, special
so
comfort
great.
animal.
I love llamas.
And filmed it, just in their great YouTube videos, just trying to see how far they could push the tyranny of the weak. I'm so sensitive, and you better, gosh darn it, accommodate my sensitivity, or I will destroy you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there are some college professors that are just really at their wits' ends with the aggression being delivered by people who say, you're making me uncomfortable. And you better not make me uncomfortable.
Political effectiveness or trigger words. And one of our colleagues told me about a campus in California where one of his colleagues looked out the window and said, every class I can look out the window and see all the emotional support animals, kind of tethered to various trees and various other kinds of things. So that is I like your idea, Lisa, of the tyranny of the weak, that how can we deny people their emotional support animal? How can we launch into some politically incorrect language or a trigger word and make this person or those people feel so unsafe?
Well,
oh, dear.
Well, you're doing that in a very subtle way, but it's much more aggressive. Like if you use words that I don't like, I'm going to have my parents sue your university and try to get you to lose your job and your tenure. That this isn't just like a little tear rolling down their face because you didn't like them bringing a puppy to the lecture. This is setting in motion like bazookas to destroy people because you are not accommodating my vulnerable belly up energy.
Yeah.
And it's
very illustrative,
something.
Both of the idea of the opposites and the idea of compensation, of how it does become very aggressive. You let me bring my support animal in, and you don't say whatever might trigger me, or else.
Yes, it's like the other side of Princess and the Pea. Oh my goodness, I can't sleep on the mattress, and I'm going to rip your damn head off if you don't get me a better mattress. That's a new way of writing the fairy tale that is really present in the other side of it. So that's a very interesting thing about something hidden underneath this.
And all of that, I think, so what we've been talking about really is a kind of question about power. Where is the power, and do we see the power out there, or and this, the way that we sort of project all this power, that the power's out there, but really, we're not in touch with our own kind of aggressive power on an inner level. But there's something about compulsive apologizing that feels to me like an evasion, like it goes hand in hand, or it touches into an evasion of responsibility for our lives. I think it's like if we're apologizing, right? It's like there's someone that we need to make happy or appease or something out there, right? Rather than having the reference be internal.
Yes.
Like, what do I want? What do I feel okay with? For example, let's say you have a client who comes in late every single week, and every single week he comes in late and he apologizes. Okay. And, part of what I always think, because, that happens. And part of what I always think is like, it's no skin off my nose. I mean, I don't mind sitting and waiting for 5 or 10 minutes. It doesn't really bother me, and I'll sometimes say that to people and say, look, it's really okay with me, but the person is so focused on my reaction that they're not even in touch with, does it bother them? that they miss 5 or 10 minutes every week.
Right. It's their time
It's their
after all.
time.
But it gets projected onto you or onto someone else as if it's an interpersonal matter when it's really an internal or intrapsychic matter.
Right. So there's
and the evasion is the avoidance of, what am I doing? Why am I late every week? What am I doing? What's going on here? And just displacing it onto an interpersonal dynamic or other person. And so what you were saying before, Joseph, the real issue doesn't ever get voiced or addressed.
And that example with the client who's chronically late, where the apology becomes a kind of appeasing behavior that's devoid of self-reflection. I can't remember where I read this. Maybe you guys will help me. It was in one of Jung's biographies. The author was recounting one of numerous experiences where Jung would get really fiery about something, and he'd really go after somebody and kind of act out a little bit. And apparently he would never apologize that particular behavior wasn't useful. But what he would do is the next day or two later, he would come back and offer a very intricate self-analysis of what was going on in his psyche to the other person. And that was the reparative gesture, to be able to name it and to have spent the time to analyze it. And I've always thought that was outstanding. And I've often used that in my life.
Yes.
I think apologies are actually really hollow.
Well, especially the kind of knee-jerk, this kind of thing that we're talking about. I mean, I think, reflecting on having hurt someone, taking it in, feeling remorse, and going back to them and saying, I am so sorry. That's very different than, oh, I'm really sorry, I'm late. This kind of reflexive and, again, compulsive.
Yes, I think so. But even let's say in the 12-step program, people go back and make amends. Just, I'm really sorry and I feel bad. Yes, that means something, but I think people need to talk about their process underneath that. What's happened such that at one time you were happy to do this to me and now you feel remorseful. I think part of the sacrificial offering of repair is being open enough to talk about it.
Yes, I would agree.
I think there has to be, in order to make a real repair, there has to be that self-reflection that you illustrated in Jung's process of, I'm sorry about being late, to use your example, and I have reflected upon it, and I have realized, I'm making this up, that I am anxious about coming into this process. And confronting you as a way of confronting myself and adding whatever else. Then there's something in awareness that feels like there's a kind of closure. This is done now. And it's not just going to be that, oh, I'm sorry, the trains were late or the bus didn't come on time. I'm just sorry. It is hollow, Joseph. And we want the other person simply to be aware and say, I understand why I was doing this and what happened.
Right. That kind of just hollow apology is really sort of a substitute for authenticity.
Yeah.
Right. And if somebody comes and offers the product of a self-reflection, there's also at least a little ease in the other person that this might not happen again. Like, wow, they really achieved a new stance around this, and I don't have to constantly defend against them doing this thing again. I mean, in the root of a deep apology, compared to, I think, the compulsive apologizing, where the words come out very, very fast, and perhaps even about objectively fairly superficial issues of, oh, there's dust on the table. Oh, the water glass has a fingerprint. Oh, I'm so sorry that I didn't answer the doorbell 2 seconds sooner. But where it starts out, I've almost thought, as the way of initiating conversation, that I'm sorry. And we can see this in the culture, by the way. And in some studies, it seems to be a behavior that is more prevalent among women in many different cultures. That I've been in the supermarket and had, a woman just stand next to me for a moment to reach a box and then walk away. And then as soon as she's in my proximity, she's like, I'm sorry. And then she's like getting her box of noodles. And I'm thinking to myself, like, there's not even an offense. Like, I have no idea what this person is apologizing for.
Well, and of course, I mean, we know that women tend to be more like higher in the trait of agreeableness, and so that would sort of track. But I think it's, when we find people who do this, if we're working with someone, they may not even realize that they're doing it, and lifting it up can be helpful because, it can be. There's a way in which it could be helpful in certain situations to be overly apologetic, but it can really hurt you in some circumstances.
It can. And there have been a fair amount of research about women in the workplace, and particularly women who have the talent and drive to move to higher levels in organizations, that compulsive apologizing causes them to lose status and credibility and trust. Well,
I find that I have, probably like a lot of analysts, probably 60% of my caseload is women. And for a lot of women, one of the big life tasks is to claim authority.
Yeah.
And boy, compulsive apologizing, it's sort of the opposite of stepping into your own authority and just being able to accept if you're wrong, being able to accept if you maybe stepped on someone's toes. That's how it feels to stand in your own authority, not to be apologizing every time you turn around.
And I think that's really hard won.
Yes, I agree.
And it's not limited certainly to women, but I too have encountered it in women, of finding your voice, finding authority, and taking a stance is hard won. It's not as if this is a sort of like, oh, okay, well then tomorrow I'll just.
That's true.
It's a really difficult road to go down, and there are myths about this, and Cinderella had to go to the ball, and Psyche and the myth of Psyche and Eros, I had to go through all kinds of tasks in order to claim her authority.
Yeah, I mean, we could imagine even that this is the heroine's journey.
Yeah,
to claim that that's the treasure,
It's a big treasure, and it's hard won, and it's worth working toward. It's really worth working toward.
What this brings up for me is, in terms of authority, is this feeling that if I have a sense of personal authority, it means that I can kind of take care of myself. And what that would also mean is that if I believe that I can take care of myself, then by extension, I believe somebody else can also take care of themselves. And if you really believe that another person is resilient and able to take care of themselves, you don't need to constantly apologize to them.
Nope.
Even if you did slightly chafe against them. If you really thought they're strong enough, like, it's okay, I just barely bumped against this person. They don't need a bucket of apologies because they're not that fragile.
Right. And then you're in a really lively dynamic with the
Right
other
on.
person.
Yes, exactly.
So let's take a transition into a dream.
Hi, this is Deb from This Jungian Life podcast. Joseph, Lisa, and I have been deeply moved by your response to our work. But producing, editing, and distributing it involves substantial expenses, and now we need your help. Please stop by our website, thisjungianlife.com, and click on the heading, Be Our Patron. You'll be redirected to our Patreon funding page. Patreon helps creators connect with people who believe in projects like ours. There, you can sign up with your credit card to support us for as little as $1 a month. And at higher levels of support, we'll provide special episodes, behind-the-scenes photos and stories, and a chance to join a select pool of listeners for dream interpretations. Once again, please go to thisjungianlife.com and click on Be Our Patron. Thank you. Okay, well, let us transition without apology into our dream for this week. This is a dream that has been sent in by a woman who's 27 years old, and she has an administrative position in a school. And here's the dream. I'm at a holiday work party for the very exclusive private school where I work, but it's in a big, old, rather shabby hotel that reminds me of a firehouse where my family used to have annual holiday gatherings. I'm mingling among all of the people and, as is true in my conscious life, can't seem to find a group with which I feel completely comfortable or myself. I feel like a lonely misfit in disguise, feigning conformity and pleasant attitude. I go upstairs to where the bathroom is supposed to be, and it feels very far away from the party. The second floor is creepily empty and quiet, with several large empty rooms. I don't remember actually going into a bathroom, but as I'm about to go back downstairs to the party, I see an infant boy teetering at the top of the staircase on the landing. He is far too small to be walking. I immediately pick him up to save him, and he looks up at me, clearly distressed, and begins speaking as a much older child would. I ask him where his mother is, and he says he doesn't know and is crying. I don't remember all of what he says, but he tells me that he is in kindergarten. I hold him to my chest, and he begins to calm down, eventually falling asleep. I feel affection for him and give him a kiss on the cheek, but I'm alarmed and unsure of what we will do. I go downstairs to the bartender of this party and ask where this boy's mother might be. He says, "Probably in the party upstairs." No one at the work party seems to notice or care that I have this lost baby. I go back upstairs, and as before, there is no one there. Just an open door exposing a room with these creepy, industrial-looking blue closet doors, almost like storage spaces, underneath a fluorescent light. I feel a deep sense that this situation is not right, and a strong determination to get myself and the baby out of there. The dream ends with me standing on the landing, baby still pressed against me. And this dreamer adds that she is in a period of significant stress, hoping to apply for grad school at the end of the year, but not happy in the workplace and longing for a more free, creative, and financially remunerative existence. Her feelings were loneliness at the beginning, and then unease when moving upstairs, like the place was haunted. Alarm at seeing the baby, and then affection and confusion about this whole situation. And finally, she notes that the baby's face looks like someone in her brother's family, and that her brother has had some serious personal and legal troubles. This is a fairly long dream, and I tend to begin at the very beginning with the dream setting and the exposition of her at a work party at the private school in a big, old, rather shabby hotel that has some childhood memories of the firehouse where her family used to have holiday gatherings.
Yeah, somehow there's kind of a conflation of her work family and her family, isn't there? They're somehow in the same kind of neighborhood.
Yes, that she experiences a certain kind of tension and wound inside of herself, both in the family and the work environment. Mm-hmm. This feeling of
very
not
similar.
Being received. And that's a congruent thread. One of the things that I like to encourage my clients to do, particularly when they have a longer dream like this, to try to grab hold of thematically, would be to ask them to title it. And I'm so charmed sometimes by how people will title their dreams. If I were to title this dream just to create a thread, I would call this Claiming My Child Self. Because that seems to be the trajectory, although it has a lot of parts, that she finds a child, and wonderfully in the dream, she claims it and makes a decision that she's going to take care of this child, even though there's a lot of unsurety about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But she's got it in her arms, and she's going to solve this mystery.
Yes.
And that's a huge piece of work, and as uncomfortable as it might be in this dream.
I hope, building on what you're saying and also really noticing that she says that she feels like a lonely misfit.
Yeah. And I bet she
And then
has
she
felt like
adds that to, in disguise, feigning conformity and a pleasant attitude. And in her associations that she provided us with, she does feel like a misfit at this school, wants to go to grad school, and some of the issues with her brother that were troublesome for the family, he was a misfit. And then she finds a baby who's also been, well, more than a misfit, he's been abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
But the misfit is the fit with where's his mother?
Right. Where does he belong? Who's caring for him?
Where does he belong? Right. And again, that sense of being an outsider and not belonging.
And I think the image is so powerful. If any of us were in a situation, or you're watching a movie and you see an infant boy teetering at the top of a tall staircase, you can just know everybody in the audience is instantly groaning.
Yes.
And that I would imagine she feels just like that in certain situations in her life. And that the dream maker really fed that back to her in this very poignant image.
Mm-hmm.
And what it constellates in her and in us is to sweep forward and connect with that child so that they don't inadvertently harm themselves.
I also found it so poignant. There's two places, right? I ask him where his mother is, and he says he doesn't know and is crying. And then she goes downstairs, and she goes to the bartender and asks where this boy's mother might be. And he says, oh, probably in the party upstairs. Well, there is no party upstairs. It's this, where is the mother?
Right.
Reminds
me of that children's book where a little animal goes and asks all the other, are you my mother? Yeah.
But the dreamer gives us the context that she was left to pick up the pieces of her mother's grief. So there's some way, I imagine, that the dreamer was unmothered.
Yeah, that feeling is very much in the dream. And we might not attribute a deficit of mothering to our suffering later in life. I mean, you're going to school, you have a job, you have a career, people know you as a grown-up, and it can be very mysterious to be able to attribute the gnawing dread that we feel all the time in these adult environments to something like an early mothering deficit. It can be very surprising to people.
I'm going back to another association, and that ties right into the dream that I didn't share before. He says the baby tells her that he is in kindergarten. Even though he looks like a toddler, he's in kindergarten. So part of this child is precociously advanced, even though he's really very small. And what she says in her life is that her brother started having his first serious troubles and causing heartache for the family when she was in kindergarten. So that's a time that seems like it might have really had significant trauma. And she says she was left to pick up the pieces of her mother's grief.
I have seen this in family constellation work, that if there's a family and one of the kids becomes a special needs kid for one reason or another, and the other kids kind of look okay, with all good intent, the parents will sometimes just fly to the special needs kids and really inadvertently abandon the higher functioning kids, assuming they're handling themselves, and not realize, in all innocence, that the kids left behind are really wounded by that.
And Deb, you sort of triggered a memory for me when you talked about this kid is advanced. He's far too small to be walking. He says he's in kindergarten, but he's just a tiny baby. He's talking in an advanced way. And it reminds me very much of what Don Kalshed writes about.
Absolutely.
That when there's trauma, a part of the personality kind of progresses and gets very good at handling things and kind of over functions, while another part kind of stays back behind where it can be tucked away and held safe. And the dreamer says, I had to pick up the pieces of my mother's grief. So, we might call that also a parentified child, that she perhaps had to function in an adult way emotionally in her family and kind of care for her mother.
I'm struck by the contrast of these two environmental situations that she's in the dream, of being at the party and not feeling that she fits in at all, but having to feign conformity and a pleasant attitude. And then as she leaves the party, it's empty upstairs. There are the cold fluorescent lights. No one is there.
She goes upstairs to go to the bathroom. So it would be sort of like downstairs in the party. It's kind of like the land of the persona. But then she goes to the bathroom, which is a place where we can be more sort of earthy and authentic. Well, it's where the bathroom's supposed to be, but really it's very vacant up there. It's a striking image. I wasn't quite sure what to make of that.
It reminds me of every movie I've ever seen where there's a party. Like every movie, the party's downstairs and then people wander upstairs to either use the bathroom or hide out in a bedroom and get into trouble. But it's this constant flow that somehow is in the collective.
To kind of get away from.
Yeah, because the second floor is the private space in most people's homes and the first floor is the public space. So there is a seeking for privacy and perhaps even relief because she's so uncomfortable in the collective environment in the beginning. So kind of isolating into the private space.
It does feel a little bit, and she says it, I think, at some point, that they feel very far away. So it almost feels, it has a little flavor of dissociation to go up away from the party, and it's so creepy and vacant and there's no one there. I found that when I was reading up to that point, it's an image that made me really feel about the level of distress in the psyche. I'll just say that. The appearance of the child changes the whole flavor of the dream, because even though the baby is in danger, as you pointed out, teetering at the top of the stairs, suddenly the ego has something to do. The ego now, it doesn't matter that she doesn't feel like she fits in at the party. She kind of has a mission. And the mission is to take care of that baby. It really, the second half of this dream feels totally different than the first half.
There is a real encounter here from her alarm at this baby teetering on the top of the staircase, and he's distressed. But she then, as she holds him, she says, I hold him to my chest, and he begins to calm down, eventually falling asleep. So she soothes him. I feel affection for him and give him a kiss on the cheek, but I'm alarmed and unsure of what we will do. And at the end of the dream, she says, I don't know, a deep sense this situation is not right, and a strong determination to get myself and the baby out of there. What I'm appreciating here is, despite all the feelings that she has of confusion and worry about the baby and hunting for the mother, she also feels attachment.
Yes.
And she has reconnected with a younger part of herself that ties into what you were saying about Don Kalsched's theory of how one part of the personality progresses and is precocious, like this little guy in kindergarten, and another part very regressed that he can barely walk. And there's an inner situation or an image of a possible inner situation. And she has got a connection here with this less developed part of herself that didn't get the care and didn't have a mother in an emotional sense.
I'm thinking about, maybe I'm making this up, but just roll with me here for a second. The kind of drama in the dream is, I found this baby. He's safe now with me, but how do I get him? How do we get out of here or whatever? Is that what she says?
Well, I think what the baby gifts her with, as she cathects to it, is a strong determination to get myself and the baby out of here,
right.
which is not present in the beginning of the dream.
Right.
That she's not clear of her trajectory in the beginning. She's
kind of
milling around
drifting
like a balloon in a party.
Yeah. But I'm thinking about how that sense of, all right, now I know what my mission is, but the question is, how do I do it now? It's like a sort of dangerous time, and Jung actually talked about that regarding the child archetype, how the child in myth and fairy tales is often in danger because it's the tender new life. And it could be so easily swallowed back into the unconscious. Mm-hmm. So it's this imperiled, kind of infinitely precious imperiled thing.
Yes.
But I'm mapping that onto what she says about her actual life. That she has this hope of applying to graduate school. That's the baby. I have an image for what I want my life to look like. But I'm also unhappy and I long for a more free, creative, and financially comfortable existence. So she is in danger. She has this new idea to go to graduate school maybe, but it's a very kind of tentative, tenuous situation. Will she be able to kind of carry it through?
And when I hear that and then I look back to the dream, there's a ambiguity in the dream, which I think is also in the context, which is I feel a deep sense that the situation is not right. Lots of people come in and they say it doesn't feel right, but until they determine how it's not right or why it's not right, they don't feel that they have the authority to mobilize anything. And perhaps they shouldn't. But the vague atmosphere of not rightness isn't generally enough to mobilize. But what does, now that she has the baby in her arms and she has, like you said, this vulnerable, precious part of the soul in her arms, what does constellate is a direction, a determination to get me and the baby out of here.
Yeah, she has a direction.
So that doesn't necessarily tell us where she's going, tell us that. And that's also true, even perhaps in her life circumstance. Maybe you're going to go to grad school. Maybe you're going to go a lot of other places. But you do know that you have to get out of where you are.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's at least a first step out the door.
Definitely.
I'm appreciating the double meaning here of the landing. The first time she goes upstairs twice. So she goes up, which implies a sort of forward or more elevated trajectory. And even though she feels it's all creepily empty and quiet with empty rooms, who's up there? Her inner baby. Mm-hmm. And he is in danger because he is teetering at the edge of the landing. At the end of the dream, she says, the dream ends with me standing on the landing, baby still pressed against me. There's a different feeling now. Now she has landed.
Yeah.
It's no longer the teetering feeling. Mm-hmm. And it implies, I'm thinking of airplanes and you're landing and, what's the landing spot? It feels more landed, that she's more landed and she has something to do. She has a mission of what am I going to do with this baby one way or another?
Yes, and that the baby has absolutely clear needs the way babies do, unlike the beginning of the dream when she's in her adult self, that her needs and her discomfort is very hard to validate or hard to prioritize in a way that clarifies it. But when you've got a baby, the baby has very concrete needs, which are unambiguous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels, I thought it was a really poignant, touching dream, actually. Yeah. Really
poignant,
moving.
Touching, and optimistic.
Yeah.
Very optimistic.
Very optimistic, very encouraging dream of that she does care for the baby and the baby is still pressed against her. That's the very last part of the dream. And she has really bonded and attached and made a commitment.
Yes.
To some hitherto unknown psychic content that she has been willing to meet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this dream is good medicine for this person and suggests that at least by the end of the dream, at this moment in her life, she's got potential that's in her arms, that she knows she needs to protect, She has a new quest with purpose, which at the moment she may think is finding the mother for this baby.
Mm-hmm.
What she might discover in a well-crafted tale is she's the mother of this baby, which hasn't quite landed in her mind yet, although she is instinctively adopting mothering behaviors.
Yes.
So I would say that's kind of the next step, is there is no mother that's going to arrive. She has arrived.
And is willing, has an open heart.
She's determined.
And that is really beautiful.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.